We do have a very special show for you today, and I have no doubt that you will find it quite interesting, especially when I introduce my guest in a little while. But today is August 19th, and who can believe 30 years ago, the Bahamas changed government administration from the Progressive Liberal Party that had been in power some 25 years, consecutive years, to a Free National Movement administration. And that momentous change in the political landscape came in a kind of interesting way when you consider that the leadership of the Free National Movement that had won office in 1992 on August 19th was a significant player in the Progressive Liberal Party in the years before. And I have the honor of having the gentleman who was at the time the leader of the Free National Movement and became the second Prime Minister in an independent Commonwealth of the Bahamas. With me today, I have the Right Honorable Hubert Alexander Ingraham. Welcome, sir, to Z Live. Unmute your mic for me, please. Unmute your mic. Yes, sir.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you very clearly.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be with you. I promised you I would come on your show before I do any other shows, and so I am happy to accept the invite today.
I was about to say you're famous for saying I say what I mean and I mean what I say. You did say that to me, and you kept your word.
Thank you.
And what a day to do so. August 19th, 30 years ago. I have to ask you this because there's a generation of Bahamians for whom the events leading up to and on that day are kind of not so much a part of their conscientious history, right? These millennials, as we call them. But for those of us who were very conscious of what was happening at the time, we saw Sir Lyndon Pinling and his Progressive Liberal Party as a juggernaut of a political entity. I was always wanting to ask you, did you see him and that party in that light when you took on the challenge of trying to unseat them as government?
Absolutely. I had been in the belly of the PLP. I had cut my teeth there. I became chairman in 1976. Got elected to the House, same year, the following year, 1977. Worked very closely with Sir Lyndon and others in the party. Became a minister in 1982 and got dismissed in 1984 for reasons which are fairly well known. I knew of their strength and their capacity and ability, but I also had very great confidence in myself. And I took on the challenge, and I was very confident that I was going to succeed. And as events turned out, I did succeed.
Absolutely you did. Also, I do believe, and this is probably a natural part of human reality, is that the more distance there is between events, the tendency is for those events to fade in our minds as to what they meant. And I believe I lived in a very different Bahamas pre-1992 than the one that became after 1992. Am I wrong to say that the Bahamas was a different place?
Oh, no question about it. From the very beginning, from the get-go, we did things that had not been imagined by many people in Bahamas before. When we came in and we decided that we were going to have open the Parliament in the public square, there were questions asked as to whether or not we could do that, etc. We decided that we wanted to change the budget from taking place in December every year, debate, near the Christmas time. In fact, the PLP made a statement to the effect that they were going to take them out of the court because we had no power nor authority to do any such thing. We did it. Subsequently, all governments of the Bahamas have been sworn in the public square. And I think that's now a very accepted and standard thing that's going to happen for quite some time to come. We contracted with a company to provide for satellite coverage of our opening of Parliament on in September, I think it was the 2nd or thereabouts, so that the entire Bahamas could see it and the world could see it. And that was a very new thing. And of course, then we got elected and we began immediately to implement our program. We told the public in advance that, listen, politicians are making too much money. We're going to reduce the salaries of MPs. We said, we don't like the parliamentary pensions bill that has been passed by the House Assembly. We're going to repeal it when we come in. We're going to get rid of the Immovable Properties Act because we see it as a hindrance to development. That we didn't like the fact that MPs were made chairman of public corporations like BEC and the Telco and Water and Sewage Corporation. We would change it. And we didn't like the fact that there was only one broadcast facility in the country, and that was ZNS, and owned by the government. And within weeks of coming to office, we delivered on all of those very basic promises.
One of the things, I was speaking to somebody about August 19th, 1992, and what it meant to the Bahamas. And I said to them, sometimes people get upset, but this was the reality that myself and young Bahamians of that day lived. I remember myself and Darren Cash and others speaking out about things we didn't like about the government at the time. And we were told, y'all will never wake in this country, y'all will never. There was this intimidation factor that seemed to exist in respect of how people saw government versus themselves. I remember a speech you made distinctly saying, we wait for you. And from time to time, you should change just because you could do it. Because it was a shift from, you are not our lords. You are servants of the people. And I tell you, that's one of the most profound shifts I saw in the country, and it hasn't changed. People are more outspoken, they feel more confident about speaking out because things seem to have, things change significantly.
Well, one of the great accomplishments of our election was to remove fear, F-E-A-R, from the Bahamian population, and people whose mouths were closed and wanted to speak quietly to their friends and whatnot, etc. They were to say what they meant, what they wanted to say. They didn't have any concerns about whether or not their children could get a scholarship because they didn't support the party in power. They could get a contract from the government. They could go into business. You are in Freeport most of the times. When we won, the Prime Minister's desk was filled with applications to the Port Authority for Bahamians to go into business in Freeport and get a license.
Not foreigners. Not foreigners.
Bahamians. And so the Prime Minister's office had to say yes or no. And of course, I told the Secretary of Cabinet, get them out of here and never to bring them back again. So Bahamians don't need permission from any politician to go into business anymore. They comply with the rules and whatnot, and they get their licenses. Simple.
One of the things that was also true pre-1992 was that the Bahamas faced a significant reputational issue in the international community. That there was a view that the country had been participating significantly in drug trafficking, that there was a fair amount of corruption prevailing in the governance of the country and so forth. And that was something with which you had to contend on coming to office.
But yes, you know, well, the reason why I was fired as a minister in the PLP government was because of my public stand on the question of corruption and the involvement or alleged involvement of various people in drug trafficking. And so I was very much aware of the details of those allegations. I was very conscious of the continuing publication in foreign press and elsewhere about it. And so I knew that one of the fundamental things we had to do early was to try and clean up our name internationally. We took out a big ad in the New York Times shortly after winning the elections. Then, you know, we are now in Bahamas open for business. Please come. No more bagman. No more front man. We want to do business in the Bahamas. We have clear, transparent regulations and rules. Come along. They remove the New Copy Act and the statute books and said, you know, these are the rules. Come along. You don't need to come to see me with anybody. I made sure that, you know, if you want to do business in the Bahamas, you could call my office and you can get an appointment. You don't need to have any FNM hack come with you, make connection for you, etc. It was a very big change in Bahamas, and it resulted in the opening up of many opportunities for thousands of people.
Of course, as the country saw a response in foreign direct investments to your promotion and policy efforts. One of the big investors who was on the line, I believe, under a Pinling regime, was Saul Kerzner. And I recall that became quite a controversial consideration for your administration.
Absolutely. Well, when we came to office in '92, first of all, the resorts on Paradise Island, Atlantis, it wasn't Atlantis, it was called Resorts International, was in bankruptcy, receivership. The big hotels down here on Cable Beach, they too were on the market because they had been dumped back to the government from Carnival. The new one that Carnival built. In Grand Bahama, you know what the condition was in Grand Bahama in terms of the hotels and whatnot, etc. And so we had to find a means by which we could get things moving. The government itself had owned 20% of all hotel rooms in the Bahamas. They were run down. The public treasury was bare. We had to find a means of moving forward. So Krista came along, and he was very upfront. He told us the challenge that he had in South Africa with respect to a gaming license, etc. We were going to check him out and determine that this is a suitable person to do business in the Bahamas. And we agreed. And he has caused Bahamas to be transformed as a tourism destination in a very fundamental way. The PLP, I think, out of jealousy, more so than anything else, objected to him, and they came around to accepting that he was the best thing for the Bahamas. So when they won the election in 2002, they got closer to the Kirstners than I ever dreamt to be in.
One of the things, as I recall working with you, one of the things that you seemed the most proud of, and you had many things you were proud of what you did, but one of the things you seemed the most proud of was the work you did in the Family Islands, which I don't think people today can fathom what it was like prior to 1992.
Well, you know, Adrian Gibson, when FNM MP for Long Island, tells the story. I went to Long Island, and I had Bill Allen with me and several other ministers, and we stopped at what was supposed to be the primary school in Sims, Long Island. It turned out it was just a large hall with push-out windows. It was squally that day, and so rainy. It was unlit, and they had outside toilets in the back of the an outside toilet back in the school. And I told them, I said, listen, we're going to abolish outside toilets in all schools everywhere in the Bahamas. We're going to build you a new primary school. And we continued that program throughout the Bahamas, whether or not it was the elimination of outside toilets, the building of schools, or the refurbishment of schools, or putting in roads, making sure every community in the country had electricity. You know, Loftus Roker, who was a PLP Minister of Public Works and Utilities for many years, he said publicly, when we turned the lights on in Acklands, that he, as an Acklands Islander and former minister, could not imagine or dream of the day when Acklands would be electrified. And we did that to Acklands and Marijuana and Dragon Island and all the islands in the south and Cat Island, name it, Rumkey, there it was. We also started a program to give everybody potable water, which is continuing to this day. We repaved the roads, we put in the docks. We're trying to bring the family islands of the Bahamas up to the 20th century standard, and we succeeded in many respects, whether that was in telecommunications or otherwise. And so I'm very proud of what we did in the family islands. And they were more or less politically. You know, when the 1997 election came around, every single family island constituency voted for the FNM except one. That was Mr. Pinlin's constituency. That has never happened before in the Bahamas. It hasn't happened since. Every one of them were very appreciative of what the FNM had done, and they returned that favor to us by voting FNM in 1997, all of them.
We have to take a break, but when we come back, I want to ask you if you could address this for me. You seem to have had a very practical approach to improving the governance of the country. It was not a heady, theoretical kind of thing, but you seem very intimately aware of the practical needs of Bahamians. And I want to ask you when you come back, how did that come about? Why was your mindset that way when you took office? Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Z Live. I'm Zhivargo Laing, your host. We're here speaking with the Right Honorable Hubert Alexander Ingraham, 3 times non-consecutively Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, leader of the Free National Movement, who took office in 1992, August 19th, won office this day 30 years ago. When we come back, we'll continue our discussions with Mr. Ingraham. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Z Live. I'm Zhivargo Laing, your host. I'm so glad you could join us here today on Guardian Radio 96.9 FM. I do want to let you know we have just this first hour with Mr. Ingraham. We are not going to be taking calls. Time is limited, but we're delighted to have with us today the Right Honorable Hubert Alexander Ingraham. Today is August 19th. 30 years ago, Free National Movement took office as government of the Bahamas for the first time, having unseated an administration that had been in office for 25 consecutive years. Mr. Ingraham, I wanna note something for you here. When you took office, the unemployment rate in the Bahamas was 14.81%. By 1997, it was 9.76%. And in 2001, it reached a level of unemployment we have not achieved since, 6.87%. That track of economic performance was abundantly clear in Grand Bahama as well, where the unemployment rate dropped below the national average because of a great unfair deal of investments that took place in that period of time. The Bahamas' economic growth achieved in 1990, the Bahamas had a contraction of minus 1.6%, a contraction in 1991 of 4.1% contraction. By 1997, the growth of the country was 6.9% and reached at one point in excess of 10% around 1999, only to be abated by the events of September 11th and therefrom. And those kinds of numbers both in terms of the broad economy and on the fiscal side, where GFS deficits averaged just around 1% over the course of that period, 1992 to 2001. But in the midst of all of this, very practical things were done for people in the Family Islands, very real. Like, for instance, people in the Bahamas knew what it was like to stand on very long lines to get their car's license. And then the year-round licensing took place. Very practical things. From whence did that notion or an approach to governance come for you? You're muted. Sorry, you're muted. You're still muted. Sorry, your mic is still muted. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
You know, I came from a family island community where we had very little government services. I can recall most vividly when the first nurse came to Cooperstown. I can recall that when the flying doc used to come, Dr. George. I'll never forget the day I had a toothache, and Mama made me go to Dr. George. I went there. The man just yucked my tooth out my mouth. You know? But I understood that. I also came up with the view that the government had a duty to provide access to basic services for all its citizens. And that one of the means by which you ought to judge a government is the extent to which it improves or make accessible public services to people, whether that's in health, or whether it's getting a passport, whether getting a driver's license, or a license for a business, whatever it is that the government does that you ought to have access to. And I wanted to make sure that everybody in the Bahamas have access to the same thing. And so we began with things like, you know, in 92, if you wanted a shop license in Nassau, you had to apply. It had to be advertised in the newspaper, in the Guardian, of course. It couldn't be advertised in the Tribune. And then they would fix a date, and you'd have to go downtown and sit down and wait for your name to be called. And if you've been there all day and you left, when your name came up, too bad. When they have another sitting 3 months later, they'll deal with your application, etc., etc. And so it's that kind of thing that really bothered me, that people in the Family Islands who wanted to build homes or businesses, etc., and somebody from Nassau came down from the town planning to check what you were doing, that the licenses in the Family Islands had to be approved by a licensing authority in New Providence. I found all these things very irksome, and we made some progress, but there are still plenty of things that are not yet happening. And I hope that governments in the future will continue that process so as to make life better for ordinary people. You ought not have a difficulty in accessing a public service from the government. You ought to be able to do so with the minimum of difficulties.
Someone reminded me or suggested to me that you once promised, they said, or suggested that by virtue of what was being done in the Family Islands, there would be a shift in the population from New Providence to the Family Island, and you thought it might be massive, and that didn't happen. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, you know, it's happening not as fast or as rapidly as I'd like it to happen. In my constituency of North Abaco, when I was the MP, when I ran in 1977, there were 1,300 voters. When I ran in 2012, there were 3,900 voters in that same constituency. They were imports from outside of Abaco because of all the economic opportunities that existed in Abaco. The same thing has happened in Exuma, and I expect the same thing will happen in other parts of the Bahamas. It is more gradual than I had expected, but based on what happened at Baker's Bay and Abaco and Winding Bay, etc., what's going to happen at a very new development up there near Marsh Harbor, a place called Matlow's Key, etc., hundreds more will move to Abaco. Based on what I understand has happened in Exuma, hundreds more will move to Exuma. And so the government will have to have services expanded, be able to accommodate these things, etc. And hopefully we'll begin to depopulate this island, the province, and as more opportunities exist outside of this island.
And it did happen in the 90s in Grand Bahama until the economy, the floor fell from out of that economy, because with all of what was happening at the time, many of people who had gone to New Providence had started to come back to Grand Bahama, and then the floor fell.
That's what Grand Bahama did for the Bahamas. Grand Bahama became a new employment center, and many of the people in Grand Bahama came from Nassau and from Abaco, from Long Island, elsewhere. And that's what I expect to happen in the Abacos, in Exuma, and elsewhere in the Bahamas.
The party you led for those many years and led successfully to governance is, it seems, at a low point today. It suffered a significant defeat in the last election, maybe not so much in terms of voter numbers, but certainly in terms of the manifested discouragement of voters to vote, and then the number of seats they got. What is your take on the state of the Free National Movement today?
Well, you know, the FNM is a very resilient organization. In 1977, the year I got elected to the House, the FNM won 2 seats in the House of Assembly. In 2002, when the FNM was defeated after my departure, the FNM won only 1 seat in the province. By 2007, the FNM became the government of the Bahamas again. It lost in 2012. 2017, it came back with a huge majority of votes. It's lost the election at last. The FNM knows what it has to do to be able to climb back to power, to govern. It has done so before, and I have every confidence it will do so again.
There are people who believe that the leadership of the party by Dr. Minnis dealt the party a significant blow and may have been the most significant contributor to the loss in the election. How do you see Dr.
Well, the FNM is a party that's in movement. You know, people move in and out. You know, for instance, you know, some of those of the 49 candidates we had in 1992, 11 are deceased. Some of the others have decided to pitch their tent elsewhere. Many of the persons who voted against us in 2002 came back in 2007, and some of those who voted against us in 2012 came back in 2017. What both major political parties have to come to terms with, and their supporters come to terms with, is that neither party has sufficient supporters to guarantee their election victory. Both parties need to attract persons from the other side to them. And so the FNM's job is not only to get back FNMs who didn't come up last time, but also to encourage and persuade disgruntled PLPs to vote for them. And one of the politics is, as soon as you win the election, you start to lose supporters the next week. Because as more and more people get disappointed in what you promised and didn't do, etc., they become disenchanted, etc., and they become pickings for the next time. So the reality is, if you are 100% today, well, you'll come down, and so the other side has to make it attractive for those disenchanted persons to come and support the other side. And of course, you know, the FNM is made up of this large number of persons who were originally PLPs. Of course, the FNM was formed by original PLPs. Its leader, Cecil Wallace Whitfield, was the chairman of the PLP. Orville Turnquest was a secretary general in the early days of the PLP. I myself was a former chairman of the PLP. All of the dissident 8 were PLPs, etc. So the reality is that people have moved one way or the other, you know. In the PLP now, there are known FNMs. In the FNM government that Minnis had, there were known PLPs who came over. Unfortunately for the Bahamas, I think we don't have a sufficient number of persons who come into political and public life now who are sufficiently grounded in their and firm in their beliefs, so that they are willing to go to the side they think is going to win, and that's the reality.
That floating interest seems to be prevailing across the globe now, because you could be Republican today, Democratic tomorrow. It all depends on how the thing shifted.
Absolutely. I expect that the FNM will do all the necessary things to regain the public confidence. There are good reasons why the public decided to vote against the FNM in the last election. The FNM know what they are, and so they must take steps to not repeat them and to demonstrate to the public that they are sincere and that they will not repeat those things that the public found offensive.
I'm going to take my final break with you before we say goodbye, but I want you to think about this and answer this question when we come back. The new administration is in. Mr. Davis is Prime Minister. I'd like to get your thoughts on the job you think they've done so far when we come back. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Z Live. I'm Zhivargo Laing, your host. We're talking with the Right Honorable Hubert Alexander Ingraham, who led the FNM into victory in 1992, August 19th, 30 years today. We'll be back after this break. Gentlemen, to Z Live, I'm Zhivargo Laing, your host. I'm so glad you could join us here today as we speak with the Right Honorable Hubert Alexander Ingraham on this August 19th. It's 30 years since the Free National Movement won office for the first time. And Mr. Ingraham was, of course, leader and became Prime Minister of the Bahamas. We have a new Prime Minister. He's been in office, a new government, new administration has been in office now a little under a year. Your thoughts?
Well, the PLP won the election. There was a low poll. 65% or thereabouts of the population voted. They won convincingly. They have, since they've been in office, put on a first-class show of public relations. I envy them. I could never produced such a show when I was in office. The public is very happy that the FNM government is gone, because they really wanted the FNM out. They wanted the FNM out. So the public is willing to excuse many things that the present government is doing, because they're just happy to say, well, at least they ain't there now. But as time goes on, they will be judged by the public, as we all have been up to now. They have not done anything major since they came in, except that they reduced VAT from 10%, put on bread basket items, and they were able to get away with that. The public accepted that 12% is better than 10% is better than 12, even though it's costing lots of money for lots of people who can't afford it. But generally speaking, they are getting a good review by the population so far. But that's on the surface, and I expect that not long from now they will be held accountable for their actions or inactions, just like everybody else. What I do know is that they have been very reluctant to make decisions about anything that's possibly controversial. Well, you can only push that back so far. At some point in time, they'll fish off out. But right now, they have their finger up there, and as the wind is blowing, they back down or they move. Fine.
NIV, marital rape.
They're not going anywhere. NIV is not going anywhere, and the government is to make a decision on it, etc. I was in Nago the other day. I just want to make this point. I was in Nago last week, and Nago had a resident doctor. So I had a folks who is now just over 90 years of age. Father was up there as a doctor. We built a wonderful mini hospital up there, and then they told me that there was no doctor there. So it's that kind of thing that the government needs to take account of and try to ensure that the public get the services that they require and deserve. And public relations is going to only do so much about this, the other thing is, that there's clearly a scarcity of money. Many people are complaining who can't get paid or what have you, etc. But the government's not acting as though there's a financial difficulty or challenge. That too will catch up with them. So I suspect.
30 years, 30 years later, 30 years from the day you first became Prime Minister of the Bahamas, 30 years later, what are the greatest concerns you have about this country?
Well, my biggest concern about the country is, well, not my biggest concern. One of my big concerns is the extent to which we're going to deal with immigration. We are very skittish about foreigners. We want them here. We want their money here. But we don't really want them here. We have large numbers of people who are here, who have no status, who are entitled to status, etc. And we are kicking that can down the road, etc. I fear that that's going to be a problem for us at some point in time. That's not going to be easily manageable. Other than that, I think we're going to find the means by which more and more services are provided from the Bahamas to create jobs. Unfortunately for us, unless you have big developments like Flathead or Bahamas, etc., there's no means by which you can suck up the pool of graduates from high school and colleges, etc., in an economy like the Bahamas. And so more and more unemployment is going to become a significant problem and challenge for governments unless we find the means by which we can do otherwise. People talk about industries and whatnot, etc. But the reality is services is what we can do, and services is what we can attract. But that also depends upon the extent to which we are prepared to have an immigration policy that encourages it and facilitates it.
And of course, these days it seems like the Bahamas is battling a violence issue and crime issue. Does that weigh on your mind heavily at all?
Yes, that's the reality. That's a hangover from our past in recent years. But I expect that will abate. I don't believe that the number of murders, for instance, will continue at its current accelerated rate for an indefinite period of time. If only because many of those were killed and murdered out. But I expect that the police will be able to get a handle on it. But the reality is that this comes from society. Society is producing more and more people who are inclined towards criminal activity.
You want to leave us a word to this people listening today, 30 years on reflection from that first day, August 1992.
Well, I'm very grateful for the opportunity I had to become the Prime Minister of Bahamas, and the public put their confidence in me when I was just a couple of weeks into my 45th birthday. Nobody since my time has been so young. Everybody since my time has been as old as I was when I retired. And so I'm grateful, and I ask them to hang in there, do the best they can, and I'm here. I am gone. I haven't forgotten you. And I trust you haven't forgotten me. Thank you.
I think that'd be very hard. Mr. Ingraham, thank you so very much for keeping your word and for honoring us today with your presence. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Z Live. I'm Zhivargo Laing, your host. We were here speaking with the Right Honorable Hubert Alexander Ingraham, former Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, leader of the Free National Movement when it took office 30 years ago, August 19th, 1992. We will be back after this news break.